Have you ever wondered how Freaks and Geeks make their euphoric bangers? Well, today I'm going to be showing you how they make the hits like Free Falling and Pressure. Welcome back to How to DNB with Inverse Audio. My name's 5X and I've got a slapper for you today. Drop a like if you've enjoyed the video, leave a comment with what you want to see on the channel next, and without any further ado, let's get right in the video.
We're drifting in the dark. Can we do better? Wish I could rewind back to the start. Can we do better than this? Better.
Freaks and Geeks are known for their straightforward yet impactful drum patterns. While they don't typically employ complex rhythms, their mastery lies in selecting the right sounds. Opt for a kick that's punchy but not overpowering, complemented by a snare with a satisfying tail that fills the mix. Their hi-hats add a splashy texture, often incorporating ride cymbals every quarter note for dynamic depth. Experiment with various drum samples until you find a perfect balance of punch and character. So this video will be a breakdown of my latest track on Pure Filth Records, Do Better. If you guys are interested in listening to the full thing, I would really massively appreciate it. So the link for that will be down below. If you're interested in a template or any of the drum sounds used in the video, they will be up on the website. So if you're interested in any drums or samples, go check that out. So as always, I'll start off with the individual sounds and then we'll get on to playing them together later. So first we've got a nice punchy kick. It's not too long and it's not too heavy, but it does the job. Then we've got two snares. One of them's used for the body, and this one that's used for the tail. So together they sound like. Next, we've got 5 different elements to the highs. So first, we've got a hi-hat going every beat. Then we've got a hi-hat going every half beat. And notice how these are shifted. Instead of being straight on the grid like this, it makes it a bit more human-like and less robotic. And lastly, we've got a hat every 2 beats. On top of that, we've layered a ride. Very nice, very splashy. And then lastly, we've got a top loop. So together on the drums, it sounds like this. I've also added this counter snare just to make it a bit more interesting. And if we look at the mixing, I did go over this in my mixing video, so if you want a full depth tutorial, go check that out. But on the kick, I've just got a standard clip, which just clips the kick and makes it a bit louder, better for the headroom. Next, we've got the 2 snares. So the first one's unedited. And this second one, we're just removing those low frequencies just to get the high end of it with a bit of sustain on a kilohertz. We made it really wide with this S1 imager, and then I've actually chucked another wider on top of this. And then on the snare bus, we were increasing the attack and sustain, doing a little bit of pump as well. Then we've got a slight bit of distortion, bit more distortion. Then we're removing the low end. And lastly, a standard clip just to control those peaks. On the hi-hats, I mostly don't have any effects, but most of the punch in the drums comes from the parallel compression. Now what I'm doing is sending my main drum bus into this parallel compression, and on there I've got a Pro C2 with a parallel compression preset. On top of that, we've got a standard clip, and lastly, just a slight bit of distortion just to glue it all back together. So without it, and with, just adds a bit more character and makes the overall drums just to have a bit more weight to them. To capture the essence of Freaks and Geeks dance floor energy, embrace bass lines with weight and presence, moving away from the traditional 1/8 note rolls and explore longer, evolving bass sequences. Utilize dual oscillators, pitching one up by 7 semitones to generate power chords that command attention. Layering is essential here. Combine different bass elements to craft a rich, dynamic sound. Integrate sliding notes and pitch bends for fluidity, and don't hesitate to inject refills to add excitement and variation to your bass lines. Now for this track, I've actually used a combination of 4 layers for the bass, and they sound a bit like this. That consists of the sub. As we can see, the sub is just a sine wave with a few more frequencies, and it's got a bit of drive on the filter. It's doing a pretty simple melody, just following the root note. Then the first interesting bass is we have this low bass that plays the exact same notes as the sub. And as you can see for this one, we've got a B-sod square and a gritty wavetable. Now, all of the basses in this track are using this LFO that's shaped exactly like this. This just brings it up slightly, which opens up the cutoff and brings up the level. So you can hear it's quite a gritty and just a flat sounding bass, but because we've layered a few on top of each other, it gives it that character. So here's the patch. Now we have two mid basses. One of them, my thinking was just if I have one in the center and then two wide, it will create a really full sound. So this is the first bass. And to achieve this, we used a Monster 7 and a saw rounded wave. As you can see, I've got LFO1 here going at 9 Hz just to create a slight bit of detune, just to make it a bit more interesting. And then we've got that LFO doing the exact same thing as we had in the low bass. So it's just controlling the level and the cutoff. And then the same similar effects, just a bit of a hyper, distortion, chorus, compression, and then a last filter just to cut out them lows. Another interesting technique that I applied here was using this pitch bend automation. And now if you take a close look at this pitch bend right here, it's just automated to give the melody a bit of variation and make it a bit more interesting. And then lastly, the second mid bass that we have is playing the same notes as the other mid bass, except this one we've made really wide. As you can see, LFO1 is just doing all the same things, the level and the cough, but we don't even have any effects on this one. We've used quite gritty and metallic wavetables because we've already got the main pitch from this other mid bass. This one is here just to complement it. So if we take a look at the mixing that we've applied, this is what makes the basses really stand out. So the sub, it doesn't have anything on it. This first low bass, we've just got a bit of decapitator for some distortion and volume control. Got an OTT just to glue that sound a bit more. We've got a rift just to drive it a bit. I'm not really using the distortion too much. And lastly, an EQ to filter out the sub. Next, we've got a mid bass. So next up, we've got that first mid bass. Now on here, I've got thermal, which is just a distortion. We've got quite a bit of decapitator on here. I'm using a drive of 5.5. So without anything, it sounds like this. It's just a bit weak and lacking flavor. So even already with those two, we're getting there. And then you guessed it, I added yet another distortion. This one's literally on the soft wave shapes, but it does have a bit of drive. So we're just getting volume out of this rift, really. OTT just to glue the sound together a bit. Note that we're using a very low depth. Then an EQ to cut out the lows and an imager that's not actually doing anything, so ignore that. And then lastly, we have this other mid bass without effects. Very weak, and you can hear it's completely mono. So what we've got here is a thermal. We've got a distortion, a rift with a bounce and edge with a drive of 5 decibels. Then we've got yet another OTT to glue the sound together, just removing some of the lows again and making it wide. And then when you pair all of those together, another interesting thing I've done here is on my drum bus, I've actually added a Valhalla room. So as you can hear, whenever the sub and the low bass stop playing, the mid basses actually come through, and you can hear the tail of them basses, but it cuts off straight away when you do have the other mid basses coming in. Gives it a nice pumping effect. And then for the other effects, we've got a Fruity EQ. That's just for filtering. Automations. Next, we've got the Century Tube channel strip, which is just doing a bit of EQ, a bit of compression, and a slight bit of limiting. Next, we've got an OTT to glue all of the basses together. Last, we've got a standard clip just to save some headroom and boost it a bit as well. As you can see, it's just taken off the tops there. And then lastly, we've got a track spacer, but I'll go over that later. While Freaks and Geeks often collaborate with skilled vocalists to elevate the tracks, sourcing high-quality vocals can be challenging for many producers. Platforms like Splice offer a wealth of vocal samples across various genres, providing ample material for experimentations. Instead of restricting you to drum and bass vocals, explore diverse genres to discover unique vocal textures. Alternatively, consider creatively reworking vocals from existing tracks to infuse your production with a fresh energy and personality. So with the vocals for this track, I actually did manage to find a bit of a gem on Splice, and that sounds a bit like this.
We're drifting in the dark, can we do better?
And that actually consists of 3 layers. The first one being a main layer that sits in the center.
We're drifting in the dark, can we do better?
Then we've got a background layer which sits on the sides.
We're drifting in the dark, can we do better?
And lastly, we've got this harmony layer, which sounds like this.
We're drifting in the dark, can we do better?
So sometimes a good thing about Splice is you will be provided with different takes within that actual pack. So definitely look for them. It can be a really good effective technique to not only have the vocals in the center, but sort of all around the ear when you're wearing headphones. It can really fill up that stereo spectrum, and it can help the vocals shine that little bit more when there's so much going on in a track like this, for example. The only other thing that I've done to these vocals is exported this first word with 100% wet reverb and then reversed it, so we get this like vocal swell in the intro.
This love is here.
It's not perfect, but it works and it does the job. I've also found some ad-libs in here that work pretty well that I've just sort of scattered randomly throughout the song. Now, I won't get into my vocal chain. I will do a separate video on this. I did briefly touch over this in my mixing tutorial, so if you want to see what I did in Fever, then go check that out. But another technique that I used here, because I found that when all the bass lines were playing, the vocals were sort of struggling to get through, like so. So what I did was I added a track spacer and I routed the main vocal into this so that when the vocal plays, so that the bass is duck and gets sidechained by the vocal, and that looks something like this. So you can hear what it's doing if you turn it really high up, but I just have a slight ratio of something around 6 to 10% is usually what I find works well for me. One of the defining characteristics of Freaks and Geeks sound is the meticulous attention to atmospherics. Elevate your compositions by layering pads, ambient samples, and atmospheric textures to construct immersive sonic landscapes. These elements serve as the foundation for building emotional depth and intensity within your tracks. Complement the atmospheric backdrop with expressive leads or plucks to evoke the signature vibe of Freaks and Geeks production, transporting listeners to ethereal realms of sound. Now, for my intro, I don't believe I did too much because I found two atmospheres that just work really well together, and they sound a bit like this. So this atmosphere is actually a patch that I made in Pigments. I won't get into the depths of this, but essentially it's using granular synthesis to pick little parts of this sample and just play them at random. As you can see, there's all the different voices sort of scanning through it. And then we've got this harmonic that cuts through as well, using this LFO to control the volume. And then we've got an imager on it to make it really wide. We've got a portal just to smear that sound using the Tranquility Garden preset. And lastly, we've got an EQ just to cut out them lows and some of them highs just to make space for all the other elements. Then lastly, we've got the second atmosphere, which has got a tape recorder. As you can hear, it's very pleasant and it's just from Arcade. So yeah, those two layered sound really good. Paired on top of that with the intro reese, which is just the same pattern as that low bass that we have with the sub. And yeah, when you pair the vocal on top of that, it just sounds really nice.
This love is ill. I wish that it was different.
Can't forget about the classic quarter note hi-hat with a bit of reverb on it. And a few effects. But yeah, that's all it's in the intro. Freaks and Geeks excel at crafting tension-filled build-ups that captivate listeners and set the stage for explosive drops. Emulate their approach by teasing elements of the drop early on, gradually building anticipation with each passing element. Introduce filtered bass lines that gradually unveil their full force, creating a sense of anticipation and excitement. Enhance the build-up with a diverse array of sound effects, from filters and white noise sweeps to impacts that punctuate the tension. And don't forget to anchor the build-up with a driving rhythmic pulse, whether it's a repeating kick, snare or clap, to maintain the momentum and drive the energy forward towards the climatic drop. So like in a lot of Freaks and Geeks songs, what I've done in this build-up is I've introduced the basses here, except for the sub, and I've just filtered them so that they come in really slowly. And then towards the end, they're nearly fully in. And then I've left this reverb tail so that it sort of trickles on. And yeah, by the time the drop hits, that reverb's died off. The next element that we have is this repeating kick, which has actually got a low cut on it, and it slowly opens up towards the drop. And then you pair that with a clap, and you'll have this. and a reverse kick. Sounding very nice. Lastly, what you're going to want to do is spam some effects. So you want to go for white noises, impacts, risers. This is what the lead up to the build up sounds like. As you can hear, we've got this really nice crowd noise when it drops. It really helps to fill out a track, especially in Dancefloor. All right, so as I was saying before FL Studio crashed, I've got this really nice crowd noise on the drop. It helps to fill it out so much. Sounds like this. It's just really nice to hear paired with a normal impact as well. But yeah, that is essentially how I made this track. On my mastering, I believe I did just use an ozone. I will do a mastering tutorial at some point as well, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, I want to thank you so much for watching. If you want to go check this track out yourself, I will link it in the description. It's called Do Better. If you search up 5x Do Better, it's released on Pure Filth Records. If you're interested in one-to-one tuition, then please go over to the website or shoot us a DM, shoot us an email. If you're interested in good, high-quality samples, go check the website as well. We now offer mixing and mastering services. But yeah, let us know what you want to see on the channel next week. And without any further ado, peace.